Welcome back to Spitballing Cards. In today's video, I want to discuss how playoffs impact players who are hot in the playoffs. In this episode, we have me, Scott, Phil, Jeff, and Ty. Ty, this is your idea. It's a good idea. We were talking about like Corbin Carroll getting hot, and because he's getting hot, does that matter? Because the Diamondbacks are going to make the playoffs. Is that going to give you a time to sell his cards, right? Like, is there an opportunity in sports cards to take advantage of that hype? I want to preface this by saying I think Corey Seager was the most recent example of a player who didn't have a great regular season. Like he was good, but then he had his MVP, World Series MVP, and his cards went up. So like, is that something we should try to time in baseball cards, or is it just too difficult with how the game of baseball plays out? What do you think, Ty?
Generally, I think I'd look for players if you really want to try to time it. It's a gamble like anything else, but you can try to time it with players who don't already have buzz behind them. So I wouldn't be looking at Judge right now and saying, I'm going to bank on the Yankees actually winning a series and him doing really well in that series. I'd look at a guy like Seager last year who had a good season, but still his card prices were flat. His card prices hadn't really done much of anything. And then he went on a run in the playoffs last year. And he did see some life in his cards. So if you're high on a team, whether, it's one of the hotter teams recently or just somebody that you think could break out and be put in the spotlight in that playoff environment, that's sort of the recipe for card success on a short-term speculation this time of year. So that's sort of where my mind was around this. I was also just looking at, some of the teams that are kind of flying under the radar going into the playoffs. Since the All-Star break, the Padres and the Diamondbacks are tied for the best record in baseball. And yet they're both wild card teams right now, pretty strong locks to make the playoffs, 95% to make the playoffs, but they are wild cards behind the Dodgers in that division. They're as hot as anybody. So it's kind of interesting to look at them again. And you talked about Corbin Carroll, he's hot right now. He's super hot, and his card prices are only just now starting to kind of come to life.
Great point. Phil, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I see the playoffs as something where it's like a platform or a pedestal to give players hype that wouldn't ordinarily get it, as Ty's saying. So, and people, the collecting community isn't dumb. So ideally the players who would be under the age of 30, I would think, to really benefit from that the most. So I don't think necessarily your team has to go far, but it would help because it would give you more opportunities to shine. And like what Ty's saying, Judge, Ohtani, and others, you can't expect either one of those guys to have an impact on a series outcome, meaning whether the Dodgers or Yankees advances or don't advance. They might have an impact on a single game, but on the series itself, that's why baseball is different than other sports, where opportunity and influence is very distributed and it's not dominated by one or two guys. In baseball, you don't know who's going to be the hero in any given series. Because of that, what I do is I tend to use this as an opportunity to sell what I have. So I'm not doing a lot of buying. I'm doing selling. Okay, Marte just had a few ridiculous good games, or Royce Lewis just had another, period where he just hit home runs in 3 consecutive games. And then I would take those opportunities to sell versus buy, because it can be a pedestal for a lot of hype and buzz, but a lot of it I feel isn't necessarily prolonged until the next season, unless you're learning more about that player, unless this affects the player's longer term value. If we believe something differently about the player because of this, or is this just, it's a hot week for the player? So really, why would we buy and hold at this point when we're buying at elevated prices?
Phil, a good example of that is Adolis Garcia from last year. He's a good example. Exactly. We can keep going, but I just wanted to point
I had a guy in my chat who had his 2018 Bowman Chrome Auto Superfractor, and he was like, guys, do I sell it? And we're like, yes. It was so he had that ridiculous stretch throughout the ALCS. And then the World Series happened, and he had a home run, I think, probably in game 1. He ended up getting injured, I think, in game 3 or 4 or something like that. But we all told him, yes, this is going to be your best chance to sell, especially given Adolis' age and his impossibility to ever make it to the Hall of Fame. Some guys have a long shot chance, he has a 0% chance, right? So a Rosarena, guys like that would fit the mold as well for this is true short-term buzz. Please capitalize on this. This is not going to continue to the next season. This is not affecting Jeremy Pena, and his stretch isn't affecting the player that he is. He's a player that is streaky, and he has these moments. He's never going to be a top 5 shortstop in the game, in my opinion.
Yeah, another example of that, even just from last year's World Series, look at Evan Carter. Here's a guy who came and took the
Yeah,
world by
true.
storm, ended up hitting third in some big playoff games after hardly playing at all in the regular season. So his hype coming into this year was incredible, but we see that didn't pan out. Yeah, this is a great topic. I don't want to repeat what Ty and Phil said. I'll just take a little bit of a different angle at it. We talked about some of the big money, big name players already, and one thing where I do think it could help guys like Judge and Ohtani. They're guys who haven't really had a lot of playoff exposure or success, and I think that could add to it. I mean, Ohtani we haven't seen in the playoffs, so just getting more exposure, getting out there, and if you could add a big moment or two, or even have the team success. If one of those guys can add a World Series champion to his resume, that's going to be pretty big. So I feel like it can. Okay, what?
No, I agree. I didn't mean to cut you off. If you got more thoughts, I want to hear more. Sorry, Jeff.
No, I just feel like it can affect those bigger guys. Where I'm looking at a couple specific players, like for me as a Brewer fan, I'd love to see Churio get more national recognition on a bigger stage. And maybe people can sort of embrace him. Also, another guy I'd like to see who has had a reputation of being big in big games is Yordan Alvarez, who's had a little bit of a slow season, a little bit of disappointing season for somebody who's a fan like me. I assumed if he had a full healthy season, he would cruise past 40 home runs, and he was kind of slow for a lot of the year. And now he's really starting to heat up. Like Corbin Carroll that was mentioned. Yordan had a 3 home run game, a 2 home run game. So maybe he's heating up at the right time to really put on a show in the playoffs.
Yep.
I wonder if, and this is more of a thought. I haven't thought about this or think it is real, but is the playoff an opportunity for more of these established players like an Aaron Judge or like an Ohtani or a Mookie Betts to establish their floor forever moving forward? Is that what this is for? Is baking it in and with that fan base and becoming a legend for that team? Is that what this can be? It might be flat, but it stays higher than it would have dropped if they didn't have a big postseason, or is there nothing there?
I don't know that a big playoff showing, even if they win the World Series, if you're talking about Judge, if you're talking about Ohtani, if you're talking about some of the biggest names, the money into those guys is coming from all places right now. It's not just coming from that fan base. So I don't think a big playoff win substantiates their value and keeps it propped up just by virtue of those fan bases, even though they're huge fan bases and fan bases of people with money, with the Yankees and Dodgers. You can see that on certain collecting Tigers, players. You can see some of the cult favorites of Maglio Ordonez, Brandon Inge, other players who were part of a good run for the Tigers. They don't command incredible value, but they command more value than you would anticipate just by virtue of Tigers fans. If I go after top cards of those players in their Tigers uniforms, I'm going to pay more than you would expect because they were part of a random streak where the Tigers were actually good. In the case of somebody like Judge and Ohtani, there's just tons of money and hype into them. And I want to be clear. I think if Judge does do something incredible, if the Yankees make it to the World Series, his card prices are going to keep going up, and they might just go completely nuclear. But when I said I'm not looking at him as somebody I'd buy right now with that anticipation, it's just there's a lot of ifs around it. And I think there's a huge floor, a much bigger dip that could happen as the Yankees get bounced. And especially if they end up in a series where Judge goes 0-4 or something like that, the floor is much more of a probability to me than him taking off and the Yankees actually doing something there. So that's kind of what I meant, just to clarify that. But I don't know. What do the rest of you guys think about what Scott said?
I want to kind of add a little bit. Maybe this will help. The reason I kind of asked that question, I'm thinking of Buster Posey, Derek Jeter, these guys who won 3 World Series, 5 World Series, all these things. Those helped their pricing with the fan base and their legacy. And so I think that's what we're trying to get out of these bigger names, right? Maybe I'm off base, but Buster Posey would not be nearly as collected if he didn't have 3 World Series, in my opinion. Even though he wasn't that good in the postseason, actually, with the stats, he wasn't that great. It's still a big part of his legacy and Giants fans. So that's kind of what I'm wondering. Maybe it's because he's not as big as Judge is, to your point, Ty. but Derek Jeter was, and I don't think he would have as much value if he didn't have the World Series either. But I don't know. What do you think, Phil?
I don't have like a popular viewpoint here that a lot of people are going to agree with, but I think one World Series, and maybe this is what you're getting at, Scott, one World Series ring is going to be immaterial to your value. You look at Juan Soto from 2019, there were a lot of different factors that were affecting the market at the time with Gary Vee pumping base cards and such. The market was starting to heat up. COVID was coming, but the market heated up before COVID really took place. So 2019, October, a team like the Nationals, who were the underdog, I believe, for every playoff series, and they take down the big bad Astros. Juan Soto puts a team on his back, and I know Strasburg helped too. But with Soto, I didn't see maybe some short-term, again, boost based on what he showed, but I don't necessarily think that that's material to his long-term values in his career. But if it's a case where, yes, Buster Posey, Jeter, if you're winning 3+, and if you're remembered also as like a World Series MVP, which again, just because the Dodgers win it, it doesn't mean Ohtani's going to get it. If you look at the last 10 years worth, I mean, David Freese won it. I think like just every other year it's a rando. So that's probably going back more than 10 years with Freese. But yeah, I don't necessarily think that playoff outcomes like, so if Griffey won a World Series, I know he did have some playoff success. One moment that everybody remembers, and I get it. So it's not the same as a Trout. But if Griffey had won a World Series, would his cards be more valuable? If Bonds won a World Series, would his cards be any more valuable? If Pujols won one less World Series, would his cards be any less valuable? Did he have 2 or 3?
I think he had 2. I can check.
Yeah, so that would be a useful one to look at. So if he had 1 fewer World Series, would it matter? I don't necessarily think so. But yeah, the 3+, if you're on a dynasty and not just a Robert Horry, it's not that easy. You've got to be really, really good. And you've got to have the 3+, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I think so. For someone that it could help, hear me out. I have not talked about Mookie Betts that much in a long time, so you can't be mad at me for bringing him up as a Mookie Betts fan. But like, he needs to win another World Series. He has 2, but if he could win a second one with the Dodgers, 3rd total, I think he's the type of player that could really help and start to be part of his legacy if he has a big World Series. He was good last World Series. His first World Series, he was not good. Second one, he was good. This time, like, that's the type of player I think it could impact. But Phil, question for you. Let's say hypothetically Soto did not win a World Series in 2019. Okay? Did not win that 2019 World Series. It's definitely forgotten about. I would even venture to say some baseball card collector don't even know he won a World Series in 2019. Like, I wouldn't be surprised. But with that being said, if he had that same playoff performance he had in 2019 this year, 2024, walks off the best closer in baseball in the wild card, then he beats the Dodgers, beating Kershaw, then he takes the 2 best starting pitchers deep against the Astros, would we see a floor established now that he's more established?
Yeah, maybe. I think with the Astros, I think it's hard to quantify playoff success. That's part of the issue. When you talk about like, well, but the guy was like a major part of it twice. Yeah, but we can't even compare like Altuve and George Springer's home run totals because of the changed, expanded playoff format. So like, you can't even look at that for a reason why, oh, Springer's undervalued, or Jordan at some point will have like 60 playoff home runs maybe. So that's part of the issue. But hey, I get it. Like, we're emotional. This is collecting. We buy the guys that we feel a connection to. And with Soto, if he keeps on having these moments, like, these are sticky memories, right? Like, even if Soto does it for 2 different teams, it's probably doesn't matter as much to one fan if it happens for 2 teams. With Betts, it being with 2 teams where he wins his 3rd World Series versus having done it with 1 team, does that change the outcome and like the ability to have that like sticky connection with fans, to have that like emotional X factor to take those values higher? There's definitely something there. I just don't know how big it is.
Yeah.
I've got a fun comparison because you're talking about iconic playoff performance. Let's look at Reggie Jackson in his first 7 years versus Soto, Mr. October. And, you know, his cards, it's a different era. It's so hard. We've talked about this, to compare, you know, vintage cards to modern cards and what the impact of that is. I've never looked at these 2 guys side by side through this point. The numbers are pretty close on a lot of things. But how much do we think Reggie Jackson being, you know, having all these iconic playoff moments in his career has contributed to what, let's call what his floor is today?
I would say a decent amount. because
I
he
think so,
didn't have
too.
he didn't age super gracefully. I don't think, like, because I know he only has like what 60. And you click on his name. Holy cow, that was hard to get out. I don't
Yeah,
think he has like huge WAR numbers for his career. Like he didn't age as well. 74. Okay, higher than I thought. That's probably where Soto will end up too. So
and he played a long time though. He played a lot of
Yeah.
years.
and he was
he
still
did.
in Oakland at that point.
Yeah, he didn't even get
Yeah.
dubbed Mr. October until
Yeah.
77 when he was with the Yankees. So he was
Right.
doing it for a second team
Right.
at that point.
Man, maybe this
But
was
I
the
think
Soto.
I think he's a good example. Like he's a good example of this kind of question.
Yeah.
It's not enough. Like if Reggie Jackson had done in year 7 when he won MVP, had a great, maybe he did. I don't know, to be fair, but maybe that says something. I don't know what he did in his 7th year in the playoffs, or even if he was in the playoffs. So over
Can you scroll
time, that
down
question of
to his
Yeah,
playoff
zoom in.
batting? I want to see it real quick. I want to see what his championship win probability added was for his
Wait,
career.
isn't it up here?
No, it's actually below standard batting.
But there's something to be said about that point too. Like in this era of constant exposure and social media, all these moments are bigger, are amplified. So yeah, we don't know a lot of specifically what Reggie Jackson did, and maybe Oakland fans know more in those early 70s World Series. But now everything is so amplified, all the fans get to see every single at bat.
That's a good point.
It looks
That's
like
a good point.
in that MVP season, he did have a really solid stretch, it looks like.
One thing, Reggie Jackson in the World Series. Oh, can you go back to that time?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So when he won the World Series MVP, he had 25% win probability added in one playoff series, which is really big. Where is it? Right there. He was the MVP of the World Series. I didn't realize how good George Springer's World Series was in 2017. He had a 55% win probability added that one little 7-game series, which is insane. So he actually has a higher total career postseason win probability added at 68.7 than Mr. October does, which is just interesting. So,
well, how much of the trash can played?
That was 2017. That's tough because outside of that year, he was still really good, but I don't know.
40% trash can, 15% Springer.
You just pissed off our 5% Astro fans.
All right, but that, hey, that's a good example by Teapot. Like, so there's got to be other exceptions where like playoffs, postseason success definitively helped their values. Like that's the case with Jackson, obviously. So who else? Is Bumgarner a case? Is he still super
Yes,
cheap?
Bumgarner is a really good example, Phil.
Okay.
Yes, that's a good one because he was so good. Like Madison Bumgarner, he aged horrendously. He looked like he was a Hall of Fame lock. He aged horribly, but he has those World Series defining moments in Giant fans' eyes. That's a great example of a player that I think it matters to. If he didn't win a World Series, he wouldn't be remembered nearly the same way, in my opinion. But he's also not an A-tier guy, so I don't know. His car just go for a ton. That's all I know. Much more than you'd expect.
Well, what we should do is revisit this conversation during the playoffs and after the playoffs, just to kind of check in and see if there's any individuals that it's helped in the short term.
Well, I'll show you. Phil brought up a couple of guys, or I think collectively we did some good references to the last 2 years. So we talked about Adolis Garcia and Jeremy Pena. So here's Garcia last year. And this is showing their price change, his price change percentage on 2 cards, his PSA 10 Topps base card and his rookie auto raw. And these cards just shot up to the moon, over 500, almost 600 plus % increase in price during that run. Now they're not the most expensive cards in the world. If we look at them, they went from, this raw auto went from $15, shot up to $72, $84. But the moral of the story here is, if that happens, yes, sell it. Just sell
like Phil said, look at that curve. It's very short-lived. You get the
hold on to it.
Ordinary off-season holiday doldrums anyway for baseball when it's out of sight, out of mind. But especially for somebody that gets that high that quick, get rid of it.
And then
was there a new floor established? I think when Ty left, I think the last sale is still higher than where it started. So that's interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, it's on this rookie auto. It's still right now 23. Hovering around $18 to $24.
But you're mad if you carried it that whole way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, but these are the guys like that percentage wise can have a big payday. And you talk about floor versus ceiling, like if you're able to scoop cards like this, like a rookie auto of somebody that's got a good like shot to spine, a good shot to shine in the playoffs. Like, let's say that he doesn't do what he did last year. Well, then you're just selling this card for $15 and taking a small, like you can make some good money on those types of things. Same thing with Pena a few years ago. His raw auto. I mean, you can see when they went on that, he came up and he was hot, and then he went on that World Series run, wins MVP in the World Series. This card went up to $289, and it's come crashing down. Unbelievable, $18. So no floor set on said Jeremy Pena.
Yeah, the floor's gone.
He's having a pretty good year.
He's having a decent year. Yeah,
he's doing pretty good.
So let's ask one more question and then wrap this up. I know we wanted a little bit shorter episode today. Are we glad we collect baseball cards where it doesn't really matter, playoffs? Or do we wish we were like other sports, like basketball and football, where it absolutely matters? It's almost all that matters. I'm personally happy that we have a sport that isn't as irrational as other sports, because that just makes me happy the regular season actually matters to me personally. But what are your thoughts on it?
I'm not sure how rational, but yes, I'm glad that I collect mainly baseball cards, because I do think that the regular season does play a more important role. But like we talked about last time, a lot of it's hype, a lot of it's personality. It's not just performance. So there's other things that go into it.
It feels like a dessert for me, right? Like you can have your full meal with regular season, but it's dessert in baseball. While basketball and football, it's like the whole meal is the playoffs, and dessert is if you have 5 championships. So I don't know. Phil, Ty,
I collect everything. I collect everything. So sure,
yeah, you're
I'm
a good
glad
person.
baseball a little more rational. I actually made a video on the Market Movers channel about that. I don't remember what I called it, but like why baseball collectors are the smartest or something. Just it's a lot less reactionary. It's still reactionary. It's still the irrational sports card market, but baseball fans tend to be just more into numbers, more into stats, more into looking at the whole picture. Whereas football fans only know who quarterbacks are, and basketball fans just like people who dunk and have strong TikTok presence. So like it's a totally different market.
Yeah, Clayton Kershaw. And that's a case where his World Series helped kind of rewrite that narrative of him being a choker. But if it wasn't for that, then his Bowman Chrome Auto would be like a $5 card with the other sports. I'm not saying the other sports aren't rational, because they are, and you have more in your control in those bigger moments. But with baseball, I see it as like you've got small sample versus large sample size. As a hitter, as a pitcher, you're more likely to be able to control the regular season outcomes, where there's going to be dips. Small samples in the playoffs can unfairly penalize certain players' performance, and that could hurt their hobbies in ways that is unjust, in my opinion.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well,
Shameless plug.
Sure.
Shameless plug. Here's the video if anybody wants to watch it and stroke their own ego a little bit. Why baseball card collectors are my favorite.
And now you're a part of a baseball collector show, Ty. Look at that.
Look at that.
Okay. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. Let us know in the comments down below what you think playoffs do to cards, if they matter or don't matter. And other than that, we will see you in the next video.